It's December 2013. I'm at a bar with my best friend Chester and some very good friends of mine. But I'm cold and I'm exhausted. We've just had dinner nearby, but I've barely eaten anything. It's strange because I should feel warm and comfortable with the food I have. You see, Chester actually brought me out that night because he thought that I needed it and that it would do me good. But I was feeling awful, and the only thing that could run through my mind was, I need to get out of here. I have to leave. Earlier that year in 2013, I enlisted into national service and basic training. Like many Singaporeans, you would anticipate this time to be a time of rapid weight loss, and I eventually did lose more weight than I ever had in my entire life. This is a picture of me before going into national service. I grew up as a large child, and as any large child knows growing up, you're constantly told a definition of health that you don't meet. I never met that definition of health. Until I went into national service, and I lost more than a third of my body weight, or close to a third of my body weight, in 3 months. That was me. For the first time in my life, I met all of the criteria for what it meant to be healthy. I was active, I watched what I ate, and I looked the part. So for that entire year, or during that time, after that training, all I could think about was, what am I eating? What am I doing? Will I go back to how I looked like before? I thought about that day and night, and I'm obsessed with it. Including that night when I was with Chester and my friends. Now Chester was a great guy. He thought that he should bring me out because he knew I was stressed. Every day and night I was thinking about this, and it was for my own good. He brought me out and said, Ryan, I think you should just have a drink, you should just relax with us. And that broke me. Because at that moment I heard my best friend saying, I don't understand you. And I stood up and I left, leaving everyone confused, to find out what exactly was going through my mind. How did I feel? Truth be told, I don't think I knew it myself, how I felt at the time. Now I've gone a long way since then, and I think it's safe to say that I'm in touch with my feelings today. But what I want to do is to bring you through this journey that I went as well, and to find out how exactly is it that we talk about health that led me to that night when I made that mistake and left Chester and my friends thinking that that was the right thing to do. Of course, that begs the question as, how exactly do we talk about health today? And we talk about health in a measurable format. We talk about health in measurable standards. What does that mean? It means that whenever we look at something and say, well, that's being done, I can track that, I can see that, we think that's healthy. But of course, in that evening with Chester, looking back, that probably wasn't the healthiest thing to do. It wasn't right. What I want to get us to think about today is to move forward and think, what can we do more to go beyond just measurable standards of health? Today I'm going to take you through 3 points, or 3 main ways about how we talk about measurable ways of health. Now I'm not saying this because I'm a public health expert. I'm saying this because I lived through this. And I've seen other people live through this as well. People who are close to me, people who mean dearly to me, and people who I believe will also benefit by taking this same journey. So how do we talk about measurable ways of health? I'll start first by talking about health as having inherent value. What does that mean? When we say something has inherent value, we mean that it's either objectively good or objectively bad. And one person that I know who's been starting to talk about health like this, and this hits close to home, is none other than my mother. My mother and I, my mother knows food very well. She's a homemaker most of her adult life. She takes care of me and my sister. She definitely knows her food. Lately, apart from just knowing her food, she's also been thinking about what it means to put food in her body, or what does it mean to have nutrition and calories. The other thing that my mom has taken note about food and that I do with my mom is that we like to go for breakfast on Saturdays sometimes. And I love that because I get to spend time with her. And so one Saturday morning, we're going to a typical hawker center with typical Singapore humidity. We're queuing up for one of my favorite foods, and one of my mom's favorite foods, which is char kway teow, or fried rice noodle. We're in the queue. I think it's a good 20 minutes. We're getting what we need, and we come back down. And then my mom takes a small bite out of it. I could see her face change. She's not happy. And I'm wondering why. She says, she pushes the plate away. She looks at me and says, this is a waste of my calories. And I was a bit confused because actually I took a bite out of it. Yes, it was a bit below the standard that we're used to, but I didn't think that it would be enough for her to be repulsed by it, to push it away, for her to be sullen throughout our breakfast, a breakfast that I cherished every morning with her. She continued to sulk, but as that went on, I realized that's almost exactly what I did that night with Chester. And he said, well, Ryan, I think you should have a drink. And I looked at it as inherently bad, because that just meant that I need to evaluate it based on what's inside that food as nutrition. One of the problems with looking at nutrition simply from a caloric point of view is that we only see it from one dimension. But if we take a step back, we know that food's a lot more than just its calories. Food is our culture, it's our memories, and it's a good time with our friends and our family. And for me, it was a good time with my mother, which I think she forgot at that very moment. So at the end of that breakfast, she was still sulking. I took her back to the plate and I finished it. When I finished it, I looked at her and said, yeah, Mommy, I think it's not the best char kway teow, but breakfast with you are always the best. I want us to move beyond just thinking about food. But the other thing that we think about health is about health as activity, as planned activity. And what does that mean? When we think about health, we're always thinking about, well, what do I have to do to achieve this? You look at public advertisements away, you look at Instagram, and you look at just how people talk about health. And it's always about, well, I need to clock 10,000 steps. Or I need to go for this run. There's no one that reminds me more about this than my ex-colleague Alyssa. I met Alyssa just about a week or two back. Now Alyssa says she's a hustler, she's a go-getter. Like most Singaporeans, she works 5 days a week. Unlike most Singaporeans, she's on a spin cycle 7 days a week. To her, that's what it means like to be healthy. I've never stopped Alyssa from doing this, it's her life. I met Alyssa for lunch about a week or two back. I said, hi, how are you? She tells me, well, yeah, I'm doing okay. A couple of weeks back, I almost died. And I was like, okay. And I said, well, what happened? Apparently, Alyssa's been working hard as usual. She's working really, really hard on a Friday. And, you know, on a typical Friday, most people would take breaks and they would take a step back. For Alyssa, Friday is just one of those days she needs to be on the spin cycle. She's back on it. And she's back on it not to be lazy, she's back on it to go harder than she was before. She went very hard. She went harder at a resistance level that she had never gone to, and she stopped. And she fainted. Thankfully, her parents were there with her, and they brought her to the hospital. The hospital found her blood sugars were too low. She was pushing herself way too hard. In fact, in the hospital, she was temporarily blinded. She couldn't see until they got her blood pressure to be the right level again. And I heard all this, I looked at Alyssa and said, oh my God, like, are you okay now? How are you now? She looked at me and said, well, yeah, I'm okay. It's just that I just can't do the same activities I did last time, and I feel really weak. And I just paused and looked at her and said, girl, you almost died, right? Like, what are you talking about, being weak? And she says, I just can't go on the bike anymore. I can't do the same things. And this type of planned activity is what I hope that we can move forward from. It is, however, the same kind of mindset that I had back when I lost all that weight. Because when I was at that night with Chester and friends, I was thinking, this isn't the activity that I counted as healthy. In fact, the fact that I was staying that late meant that maybe I couldn't go for my morning run the next morning, which is the activity that I found to be healthy. Did you know that most prevailing sports science research today finds that the best athletes aren't just the ones that train the most. They are the ones who get the most hours of sleep. We tend to forget this. We tend to forget that inactivity is just as healthy as activity. And I looked at Alyssa at that moment and I said, I think that you have to take a step back. I said that just because you went through this and you can't do the same things doesn't mean you're weak. Rest is not weak. Acknowledging your limitations is not weak. And I looked at her and said, Alyssa, I think you're extremely strong. I think we need to tell ourselves the same thing. In the last part about health, we're talking about food, and we're talking about nutrition and activity. Well, what's the underlying denominator beyond all of this? It's that we're always seeing some sort of observable change. When we look at health and we look at change, we think that, well, there's progress being made. But it also makes us forget that sometimes the healthiest things aren't things we can see. Now, the most observable person that I know in terms of health and having a healthy body is my friend in the gym. His name is Hakim. Oh, sorry. There we go. I meet Hakim at the gym, whenever I'm there 4 days a week, I'm very sure he's there a bit more. Hakim's an extroverted person. He's effervescent. He used to be a personal trainer, and I have to let you know, he's actually probably in his 40s or a bit later. He's not exactly a sprightly person like myself in my 20s, but trust me, he's lifting much more than anyone that I've ever seen in my life. It's not about Hakim's ability to be fit and be healthy that amazes me. It's actually his ability to keep a smile on his face. When I'm in the gym at 6 a.m., trust me, no one's really smiling. But he is. And he's making everyone around him smile too. And I love that about him. One day I'm in the locker room with Hakim. I noticed that day in the gym he's not his usual self. He looks at me with very cursory glances, and he comes back to the locker room, and I ask him, well, what's wrong? Is everything okay? And he says, yeah, I'm okay. Which is another way to say I'm not okay. So I stopped him, I said, you can talk to me about this, like what's going on? And so he pauses and he looks at me and says, Ryan, I just don't feel good about myself nowadays. I just don't feel I'm making progress. And I was a bit stunned because, like I said, Hakim, we're in different standards of health by age, but he's definitely a completely different standard by his body already. So I was really stunned and I said, no, but dude, look at yourself, you're doing so well. He stops me and he says, no. He takes out his phone, he goes through a very specific photo on Instagram and says, I'm not looking like that. And he points to me at this person that I'm actually not familiar with. And truth be told, that person looks great, he looks huge, looks jacked. But at that moment, I just realized, Hakim's just not taking a step back to see what progress he's making, not against someone else. And it's also not about what the progress he's making physically. It's just how he is as a person that I love. And I think he's forgotten that. And at that moment, I was still reminded about myself last time too. Because I just thought that every step I take forward for health needs to be something that can be seen. Right? When I was losing all that weight, it could only mean that weight loss was a good thing for me. So I sit down and I said, Hakim, look, I can't convince you that you're going to be bigger than that person, and I can't convince you that you're going to be better than him. But I want you to know that you should be proud of yourself. You should feel that pride, and not just see it. So by now you might be thinking, well, Ryan, you're sounding very preachy. You went through all these things. How are you doing right now exactly, since then? And like I said, I think I'm in a better spot. But let me take you through some of the progress or changes that I've been making in maybe the past 2 years. This is me, slightly after the pandemic or the lockdown happened. Now, obviously I'm not as skinny as in that first photo that you saw. When the lockdown happened and when the pandemic hit, I think like many Singaporeans, I got very stressed. And I rebounded naturally. Sort of in a graph between kilogram and time, that's kind of how the peak happened. I just went back up and I lost it. I'm going to hold my reservations about, evaluating this. I'm just going to talk you through the timeline. After the pandemic happened, I thought, okay, well, I guess I should bring myself back up. And I'm very proud of myself. I lost, again, that 15 kilograms back. That was April 2021, about this time last year. And then I got fatigued. Remember last year, and at least those who were in Singapore, just kept going in and out of lockdown or some lockdown situation. I was pissed. I was tired. And I cut myself that slack. I said, well, whatever. I'm back here at 72 kilograms. And I'm happy to report that, well, I'm making slight progress again. Sorry, I couldn't choose the best pictures. I don't take pictures myself all the time, but I'm taking what I can. And that's where I'm at. I'm trying my best to just get slowly closer to what I want. That's present day. Now you might be thinking, Ryan, this is observable change. These are things that you're telling us, about and criticizing. I'm still doing this, but what I'm doing is something more. And what I want us to do is to do that more. Now this graph that I'm going to show you is not a real graph. It's just for illustrations. It's one that's not against kilograms of time, but it's one for feelings. If I could remember how I felt during those times. I didn't track how I felt. I think it's possible, but I wouldn't really recommend it. I don't do it. But if I can remember how I felt like at the start of the pandemic, well, I felt like shit. Well, this is only for illustration. But when we exited lockdown, I felt really good. But slowly, as we started to fatigue, I felt really bad. And so I realized what I needed was to go for therapy. I wheeled myself in for my first counseling session, and that's the moment where I said, well, I need to be in touch with my feelings again. And from then on until the present day, I can definitely tell you, with continuous checking in of my feelings, I've never felt better today. These two graphs is what's going to let us know that it's not just about observable change that's bad, it's also about just being in touch with our feelings that just makes it a bit more. You might think just by looking at the part about gaining and losing weight that it was a struggle, but I'm telling you, that weight gain, it was fine. It was not the biggest struggle for me. And now that brings us to present day, of course. I tell you all this from stats and facts, but what I want to tell you is what happened just last week. Last week I had a friend, Naomi. Naomi's a good friend from school, and she was telling me, let's go out with some other friends, Movin and Jeremiah. I said, I thought about it for a moment, and she was like, well, we're going to eat, we're going to drink. I said, when are we going? She said, Wednesday night. I'm like, okay, I'll think about it. When I thought about it, I thought, it's a Wednesday night, I have gym the next morning, I think we're going to drink a lot. And I said, yes. Because that night was the night that I recapped all of my memories with my friends. We talked about how shitty our lives have been since the pandemic and how much we've changed since school. We joked about we got noisy and drunk over so many bottles of wine. And I'm telling you that that's not the only measure of health, but it's a measure of health that I want us to keep in mind. Because it's not just about taking note about what you're eating and what you're doing and how you're seeing, but also about what you're feeling as well. Thank you all for your time.